मशरक़ वस्ता की सियासत में अहम पेशरफ सामने आई है। ईरान और सऊदी अरब सिफारती ताल्लुकात की बहाली पर रजामंद हो गए हैं। अरब मीडिया रिपोर्ट्स के मुताबिक ईरान और सऊदी अरब सिफारती ताल्लुकात बहाल करने पर रजामंद हो गए हैं और दोनों मुल्क 2 माह में सिफारतखाने खोलने पर रजामंद हो गए हैं। अरब मीडिया का कहना है कि यह मुआहदा चीन के दारुलकुमत बीजिंग में होने वाले मुज़ाकरात के बाद सामने आया। चीन की इस सालसी में सऊदी अरब और ईरान ने ताल्लुकात की बहाली पर इत्तफाक कर लिया है। इसके अलावा ईरान और सऊदी अरब ने सिफारती अमले की तैनाती पर भी इत्तफाक कर लिया है। इस पेशरफ के बाद सऊदी अरब और ईरान के वज़राए ख़ारजा के दरमियान बराह रास्त मुलाकात भी होगी। सऊदी अरब और ईरान के दरमियान मुख्तलिफ मामलात पर इख्तलाफात पाए जाते हैं और 2016 में तेहरान में सऊदी सिफारतखाने पर हमले के बाद से सिफारती ताल्लुकात मुनक़ता थे। दूसरी जानिब सऊदी अरब और ईरान के सिफारती ताल्लुकात के हवाले से तर्जुमान दफ्तर ख़ारजा पाकिस्तान ने कहा है कि पाकिस्तान सऊदी अरब और ईरान के सिफारती ताल्लुकात मामूल पर आने को खुशामदीद कहता है। तर्जुमान दफ्तर ख़ारजा ने अपने बयान में मजीद कहा कि पाकिस्तान चीन की मदद से सऊदी अरब और ईरान के सिफारती ताल्लुकात मामूल पर लाने का खैर मकदम करता है। यकीन है कि यह अहम सिफारती पेशरफ्त खित्ते और इससे बाहर अमन व इस्तेहकाम में मुआवनत साबित होगी। बयान में मजीद कहा गया है कि इस तारीखी मुआहदे को मरबूत करने में चीन की दूरअंदेश क़यादत के किरदार को सराहते हैं। इस मुस्बत पेशरफ्त पर सऊदी अरब और इस्लामी जमहूरिया ईरान की ज़हीन क़यादत को सराहते हैं। HPL PSL के 27वें मैच में मुल्तान सुल्तान्स ने रॉयली रोसो की शानदार सेंचुरी की बदौलत पेशावर ज़ल्मी की जानिब से दिया गया 243 रन का हदफ हासिल कर लिया। रावलपिंडी क्रिकेट ग्राउंड में खेले गए मैच में पेशावर के कप्तान बाबर आजम ने टॉस जीतकर पहले बैटिंग का फैसला किया। ज़ल्मी की जानिब से इनिंग्स का आगाज साइम अयूब और बाबर आजम ने किया और दोनों खिलाड़ियों ने अपनी टीम को 134 रन का शानदार आगाज फराहम किया। साइम अयूब 58 रन बनाकर आउट हुए, जबकि बाबर आजम भी 73 रन की शानदार इनिंग्स खेलकर कैच आउट हो गए। मोहम्मद हारिस ने भी 11 गेंदों पर 35 रन की बरकरफ्तार इनिंग्स खेली, जबकि टॉम कूलर कैडमोर 38 रन बनाकर आउट हुए। अजमतुल्लाह उमरजई 16 रन बनाकर नॉट आउट रहे। मुल्तान सुल्तान्स की जानिब से अब्बास आफरीदी ने 4 ओवर्स में 39 रन देकर 4 खिलाड़ियों को आउट किया, जबकि अनवर अली महंगे तरीन बॉलर साबित हुए। उन्होंने 4 ओवर्स में 66 रन देकर 1 विकेट हासिल की। मुल्तान सुल्तान्स का आगाज अच्छा न रहा और सिर्फ 28 रन पर दोनों ओपनर्स शान मसूद और मोहम्मद रिजवान पवेलियन लौट गए। शान मसूद ने 5 और मोहम्मद रिजवान ने 7 रन बनाए। 2 विकेटें जल्द गिरने के बाद रायली रोसो और कैरॉन पोलार्ड ने तेजी से अपनी टीम का स्कोर आगे बढ़ाया और चौकों और छक्कों की बरसात कर दी। रोसो ने पहले सिर्फ 17 गेंदों पर निस सेंचुरी स्कोर की और फिर 41 गेंदों पर PSL की तेज तरीन सेंचुरी बना डाली। वो 8 छक्कों और 12 चौकों की मदद से 121 रन बनाकर आउट हुए। HPL PSL के 27वें मैच में मुल्तान सुल्तान्स ने रॉयली रोसो की शानदार सेंचुरी की बदौलत पेशावर ज़ल्मी की जानिब से दिया गया 243 रन का हदफ हासिल कर लिया। इस फतह के साथ मुल्तान सुल्तान्स ने PSL के प्लेऑफ के लिए क्वालिफाई कर लिया। आज की जीत के साथ मुल्तान के मजमूई पॉइंट्स 10 हो गए हैं। मुल्तान सुल्तान्स अपना आखिरी लीग मैच कल हफ्ते को खेलेगी। लाहौर कलंदर्स, इस्लामाबाद यूनाइटेड भी प्लेऑफ मरहले के लिए क्वालिफाई कर चुके हैं। अब मजीद एक टीम प्लेऑफ में जगह बना सकती है और इस दौड़ में कोयटा ग्लैडिएटर्स और पेशावर ज़ल्मी शामिल हैं। कराची किंग्स इवेंट से बाहर हो चुकी है। पेशावर ज़ल्मी 9 मैचेस खेलकर 8 पॉइंट्स के साथ चौथे नंबर पर है और कोयटा 9 मैचेस में से 3 जीतकर 6 पॉइंट्स के साथ 5वें नंबर पर है। इस हवाले से 2 मैचेस अब इंतहाई अहम हैं। हफ्ते को कोयटा ग्लैडिएटर्स मुल्तान सुल्तान्स के मद्दे मुकाबिल आएगी। प्लेऑफ में पहुंचने के लिए कोयटा को न सिर्फ ये मैच बहुत अच्छे मार्जिन से जीतना होगा, बल्कि ये दुआ भी करनी होगी कि इतवार को पेशावर ज़ल्मी इस्लामाबाद के खिलाफ अपना मैच बुरी तरह हार जाए। इस सूरत में बेहतरीन रन रेट की वजह से कोयटा प्लेऑफ में जा सकता है। अगर कोयटा अपना मैच हार गया तो पेशावर अज खुद प्लेऑफ में पहुंच जाएगा। अलबत्ता कोयटा की जीत की सूरत में इतवार को पेशावर ज़ल्मी को प्लेऑफ मैच में पहुंचने के लिए इस्लामाबाद यूनाइटेड के खिलाफ मैच जीतना होगा। अगर कोयटा अपना मैच जीत गया और पेशावर मैच हार गया तो प्लेऑफ की चौथी टीम का फैसला रन रेट पर होगा।
I'll give the floor to Foreign Minister and he will speak on his visit, and I'll give the floor over to the Foreign Minister.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here for this press conference. Today I speak primarily in my capacity as chair of the Organization for Islamic Cooperation, as the chair of the Council of Foreign Ministers. And in this capacity, we held some historic events at the United Nations this week. On March 8th, which is International Women's Day, for the first time on the OIC platform, we marked International Women's Day by holding a high-level event entitled Women in Islam, in order to bridge the gaps between perceptions and reality as to the role of women in Muslim and Islamic society, and historically the way in which Islam, as a progressive religion, granted rights to women. In that context, we had a successful event with positive feedback, with participation not only from obviously within the OIC, but across the board. March 15th marks the International Day for the commemoration of Islamophobia. And in that context today, we held another historic event in the General Assembly Hall, co-convened by the President of the General Assembly and myself as chair of the CFM, where a topic of Islamophobia was discussed at this high-level event. And it was a very powerful message of global solidarity with the Muslim community, with the Muslim world. A very powerful message of global unity against what the UN Secretary General calls the poison of Islamophobia. With that, I now turn over to Mariam to coordinate our question and answer.
Before I open the floor for the question, this time we have, because we are short of time, our Foreign Minister has to meet Secretary General right after this meeting. So I will take what I will take. I'll take combinedly all the questions. So we'll start with Ibtisam, and we'll take all the questions together. Then Foreign Minister will note this down and we'll get back to you. Ibtisam.
Thank you. In behalf of United Nations Correspondent Association, thank you for the briefing. My name is Ibtisam Azim, Al Arabi Al Jadid newspaper. In your remarks and also in the SG remarks, he talked about triple discrimination against Muslim women based because of their gender, ethnicity, and faith. And you had also the discussion on women in Islam. I want to take this discussion further and ask you about the issue of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and the role it could play or should play internally regarding discussion about Muslim women rights, whether more feminist agenda, whether more equal rights, given the fact also that a lot of Muslim women wrote and talk about this for decades. So which role are you playing or going to play? Thank you. Can we take...
If you want to have a follow-up, yeah.
I'll try my best to do.
No, we will do it collectively and then. Abdul Hamid, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Mariam. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Ambassador. My name is Abdul Hamid Sayam from the Arabic daily Al-Quds Al-Arabi. I appreciate your link between the suffering of the people of Kashmir and the people of Palestine. As you know, both issues started after the inception of the United Nations. One started UNSO as a UN Truce Organization, UNMOGIB in Pakistan and India. So it's almost, we have the similar history. There are some Security Council resolutions that deal with the issue of Kashmir and similar with Palestine. However, the difference that the issue of Palestine is very present. It's almost every month we discuss it. There is discussion here, different, sometimes presidential statements, sometimes resolution. But the issue of Kashmir is absent from the United Nations. How could Pakistan bring this issue back to the core of the deliberation of the United Nations? Thank you.
James.
If I could ask you something that's not quite on the agenda of what you've been discussing here, of course you expected, but there's been some important developments in the last few hours, a rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and a restoration of diplomatic relations. What could that mean for the Middle East region and, in fact, for the world?
Okay, yeah.
Hi, thank you. I wanted to ask what, Your Excellency, what the role you thought of other religions, including the Catholics who have been involved in interreligious dialogue, what sort of role they can play to combat Islamophobia.
Azim Yasa.
you have been playing a good role, by holding all these conferences. As far as the resolutions and the statements are concerned, fine. But why the OIC, which is, league of about 54 Muslim countries, why they are lacking in creating any kind of substance to counter the Islamophobia and clear the misrepresentation of the women in Islam? Thank you.
My question is concerning the role of media play here, because when we talk about Islam, I think most of people first reacted is Taliban, ISIL, Al-Qaeda, women's rights. What role do you think the media should play to fight against Islamophobia here? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Maureen. Thank you for Minister and Ambassador. So my question is following James' question. He mentioned that Iran and Saudi Arabia agreed to resume diplomatic relations today, but this agreement is followed by China-led negotiations in Beijing. So my following question is, what's your opinion on China's role in brokering this deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia? Thank you.
Asif.
Can in any way UN be regulated or come up with some sort of enforcement to enact the measures to control the hate spread against Islamophobia?
Nasir, you have question or anybody else have question? My question is the same. Yeah. Any follow-ups?
Social media as well, where the hate speech and
Okay. Okay. So I'll give the floor to a foreign minister. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Let's try and read my own handwriting. So in the context of your question on the OIC and the role that we can play internally and within the Muslim world to combat not only Islamophobia, but the issue of women in Islam, I think that's exactly what we're trying to do. Through the events hosted today at the United Nations. Within the concept of women in Islam, I think it's important for the Muslim world and Muslim countries to reclaim the narrative, to reclaim the space, whether it's on the issue of women's rights, for example. We have to reclaim the space from both ends. We have to reclaim the space from the extremists within our own religion, who attempt to use religion as an excuse to deprive women of their rights, and we have to reclaim the space from Islamophobes who purposely and falsely create this caricature of Islam as a religion that deprives women of their rights. And we attempted to do just that in our Women in Islam's conference on International Women's Day. I think it was incredibly powerful to hear consensus, unanimous consensus across the Muslim world about the rights of women, the equal rights to women, their space within society, and particularly importantly, their right to have an education. At a time where in parts of the world people are using Islam as an excuse to usurp that right, the OIC conference on women in Islam is a strong message to such forces that not you, this is the consensus in the Muslim world. We're unanimous that women have a right to an education. And those that are depriving their rights, them of these rights, are actually doing so in direct conflict with the religion of Islam. And in that context, we had powerful women leaders across the Muslim world, women representation here at the United Nations, speaking for themselves. And I think that's exactly how we're going to slowly and steadily reclaim that space.
Can I follow up just quickly, but how do you want to put this into action on the ground in these different countries?
So I think there's a responsibility on countries within the Muslim world to counter these efforts, not only internationally, but domestically. And I also think that there's important progress that has been made. In some countries, within the Muslim world, we've already elected women to the highest offices in the land. Some Muslim countries, like the United Arab Emirates, already have 50% of their parliaments made up of women. We have to enact anti-discrimination laws and practice what we preach. And that's exactly what we're trying to do within Pakistan. I can't complain we're perfect. There are problems for women in the West, and there are problems for women in the Muslim world that we have to combat, that we have to face head on. But this is not something that changes overnight. This is something that you take 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and it's a continuous effort, whether you're in a Muslim country or whether you're in the West. I think that the second question also, that covers the women in Islam piece quite well, so I'll move on to Palestine and Kashmir. I think your parallel is very justified. There's many similarities in the plight of the people of Kashmir and the plight of the people of Palestine. I've been, and I think it's fair to say that both issues remain unaddressed by the United Nations, and we'd like to see an extra focus not only on Palestine, but also on Kashmir. You're also right to note that we face a particularly uphill task to try and get Kashmir onto into the center of the agenda at the United Nations. And whenever the issue of Kashmir is brought up, our friends within our neighboring countries strongly object, vociferously object, and they perpetuate a post-fact narrative where they try to claim that this is not a dispute for the United Nations, that this is not a disputed territory recognized by the international community. And they insist, counter to the facts, counter to the reality, that their usurpation of Kashmir should be endorsed. So while we do find it difficult to get the truth across, we are persistent in our efforts. And at every opportunity, be it at the UN Security Council or at various events that I attend or address or chair, I do make the effort not only to mention the hypocrisy when it comes to the plight of the people of Palestine, but also to focus on the difficulties faced by the people of Kashmir. On to James's point and your point, what fantastic news today! In a world where we're unfortunately no longer used to receiving good news, I think that this was really fantastic. Internationally, on a global level, regionally, the decision of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Islamic Republic of Iran to re-establish diplomatic relations, and within, I believe it is 2 months, to open all the embassies, etc. I cannot underestimate the significance of this achievement. And in my concluding remarks in the General Assembly today, I specifically mentioned both as chair of the CFM, of the OIC, and as Foreign Minister of Pakistan, we wholeheartedly welcome this accomplishment. We congratulate the leadership of Saudi Arabia and the leadership of Iran for this significant achievement. But it also goes to show the role, the leadership role that China is playing on the world stage. A leadership role that is focused on uniting rather than dividing. A leadership role that is focused on forming win-win cooperation and encouraging dispute resolution rather than encouraging perpetual disputes. So I welcome this initiative. I congratulate the leadership of all 3 countries. And particularly, I'd also like to thank and welcome and note the leadership of my friend and colleague, the State Councillor Wang Yi, and President Xi of China for this historic achievement. And media's role, the role of media as far as the perpetuation of Islamophobia is concerned, I think that's a fair point to note. Obviously, if the media is the fringe groups within the Islamic world or across the world anywhere, the extremist groups, the violent groups that make up a minuscule minority of the overall population of Muslims. After all, Muslims are the 2nd largest religion on the planet, and of them, a fraction are indeed associated these terrorist groups, but unfortunately that fraction gets an outside representation within the media, whether it's mainstream media, whether it's social media. And of course that does help color the incorrect perception that develops about Islam, and does unfortunately impact Islamophobia. So there is a role for media to play in contextualizing for their audience the difference between what the vast majority of Muslims practice and preach and what fringe elements are trying to do. I'm sure no country, no religion would like to be identified by such fringe elements. Here in the United States, they wouldn't like to be identified by the fringe and extreme elements that may exist, and no country or no religion would like to be associated with those fringe elements. And it's just as true for the Muslim world and for Islam. So there is an important role that media can play in that context. I think we've covered all the questions that I've noted down.
Sir, with regard to the conference on women in Islam, is the message that came out of the conference for equal rights for women, will it have any impact on the Taliban in Afghanistan?
An interesting question. As far as the conference on women in Islam is concerned, I think it is it sends a strong message globally. Domestically and internally within the Muslim world, it's extremely strong messaging, powerful messaging, but also globally, internationally, and across borders. That what is the true history of Islam as a religion that before other religions, before many other religions, granted rights to women such as the right to inheritance, the right to own property, the right to divorce, many such rights were granted to women first and foremost by Islam at a time when Christianity and other religions deprived women of these rights. There has absolutely been women across the world who struggled for their place within their societies and within the Muslim world. We've seen Shaheed Mohtarma Benazir Bhutto in Pakistan, elected to the highest office of the land, not once, not twice, but potentially thrice had she not been assassinated. We've seen in Turkey that they've elected a Muslim head of government. There's a female Muslim head of government. There's a female head of government in Bangladesh. There's the Singapore's president is a Muslim woman, so the accomplishment of Muslim women across the world is there for us to see. Within the Middle East, you see the transformation taking place in Saudi Arabia, where women gaining space day to day under the leadership of Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. I spent a large part of my youth in the United Arab Emirates, and as I mentioned, their parliament is also 50-50, and everywhere, whether it is the media, whether it is the social space, the entrepreneurial space, and indeed the political space, women are making their mark. So it is through our actions that we will demonstrate the role of women within Islam. As far as the impact that this will have on the Taliban, I can't speak to them. But what it does demonstrate that their actions are an outlier and not the norm within the Muslim world. And that there's no other country on the planet, Muslim or otherwise, that condones depriving women and girls from the right to education. And particularly on behalf of the Organization for Islamic Cooperation, when then this message goes that it is Islam that grants these rights, that women's rights are Islamic rights and Islamic rights enshrine women's rights, then there is no space for groups such as those in Afghanistan or anywhere else to claim that Islam justifies their actions.
One more question.
A follow-up on Afghanistan, please.
Sure.
Is Pakistan playing a role or ready to play a role to make the Taliban revert these decisions against women?
So Pakistan has consistently, ever since the fall of Kabul, engaged with the interim government, positively engaged with the interim government in Afghanistan. First and foremost, because we also believe that they should live up to their commitments to the international community, to their own people, but it is also in Pakistan's interest that there is a peaceful, prosperous, stable, secure Afghanistan at home, at peace with itself and with its neighbors. And it is in our interest that the interim government in Afghanistan are able to deliver on their commitments to their people and to the international community, because if they fail to do so, of course, they will, the first and foremost victims or consequences of that failure will be the people of Afghanistan, but the sort of the second victims of such a failure will be the people of Pakistan. For example, if they fail to live up to their commitment to ensure that their soil is not to be used for terrorism, of course, the first and foremost victim of that will be the people of Afghanistan, but secondary, the victim of that are the people of Pakistan, who have seen an increase of terrorist attacks since the fall of Kabul. There's a sort of famous saying that if Kabul sneezes, then Pakistan catches a cold. And if this precedent is allowed to be set within Afghanistan, I'm sure there'll be fringe and extremist groups, both in my country and other countries, that will try to perpetuate this sexism and deprive women of their rights in education. We also believe that these steps that have been taken by the interim government, where they are not living up to their promises, and we've spoken clearly with them on this, that it doesn't help us help them. It puts us in a very difficult situation to advocate for some of the things that the people of Afghanistan need in the form of humanitarian aid, the unfreezing of their funds, the functioning of their economy, etc., etc. Puts us in a very difficult position in where we are trying to advocate for those things, but then they are not living up to their commitments in the context of women's education.
We are ready. You can ask. Yeah.
Thank you, Your Excellency, because my question didn't get answered.
Sorry.
That's fine. The role of, and because I write for a Catholic newspaper, the role of other churches, but specifically Pope Francis, who has made overtures, has been to several Muslim countries, most recently Iraq, and created dialogue between the Vatican and different. You know, what can you say about the Catholic Church's overtures to Islam and how that's helped?
So I think that, first of all, I'd like to welcome and praise the efforts of His Holiness Pope Francis, particularly to do with interfaith harmony. And I absolutely agree that there's a role for all of us to play to encourage interfaith harmony between religions. And rather than sort of just speaking in our own echo chambers, if members of different religions and religious groups come together, I think they'll find that there's far more that we agree upon than as to what we disagree upon. Someone with the prominence of the Pope himself, I think, can play quite a significant role in this context.
Thank you again. There is some pressure on Indonesia to normalize with Israel. I'm scared that if these efforts give fruit, we will see a domino effect on Muslim countries. Would you envision anytime soon that Pakistan would ever normalize with Israel before Palestinians achieve their rights?
So as far as what you refer to about Indonesia, I'm honestly not aware and therefore not in a place to comment. As far as Pakistan is concerned, I can imagine a time when Pakistan would be able to recognize Israel, but it would not be possible without first the people of Palestine making that decision. Our country is clear, our people are clear, our history is clear. We pride ourselves that our passport never recognized an apartheid state. And at a time when South Africa were one of those countries, our passports used to say that our passports are valid for all countries except South Africa and Israel. Today there is one apartheid state left in the world, and Pakistan does not recognize.
Real quick, UNHCR is also very critical to the human rights situation in Pakistan. Could you comment a little bit on it?
UNHCR has a very important role to play across the world. And while Pakistan relies on the UNHCR's reports in the context of, for example, Kashmir, then we'll absolutely have to be willing, tolerant of any and all criticism that they may have of Pakistan's record on human rights. I can't stand here before you and say that Pakistan has an outstanding record on human rights, but I can say that there are political parties, civil society, people across the length and breadth of Pakistan that have throughout our history struggled for and achieved quite significant progress on the issue of human rights, but there's a long way to go.
I will take special Zenia, and then we'll conclude.
You haven't answered Mr. Minister, you haven't answered my question. As a chairman of the OIC, what kind of impediments and practical problems you see and experience that OIC has not been able to achieve, clearing the misperception about Islam and women in Islam?
Oh, as far as the misperception about women in Islam, or as far as the issue of Islamophobia, of course there's a lot of work that's yet to be done. But both events held for the first time here at the United Nations. The marking of International Women's Day from the OIC platform, and the high-level event held at the General Assembly today, along with the President of the General Assembly, with the OIC, to combat Islamophobia, are just two examples of our efforts to this end. But of course, we have to continue these efforts to see results on the ground.
Mr. Foreign Minister, just one quick question.
I have to go to the UN Secretary
Just
General.
one quick question. On the economic front, anything you have to need to say about on the economic front?
As far as the economy,
are you meeting someone here, sir?
As far as the economy is concerned, absolutely, Pakistan is facing incredibly difficult economic times. There's harsh economic realities across the world. We're facing the brunt of them because we have the economic impact of the COVID pandemic that we're still feeling and facing in the form of inflation. We have the economic impact of the fall of Kabul. The economic activity in an economically functioning state to our border over a year ago collapsed, and we've seen the nosedive of their economy, which has the impact in the region. We've also seen the economic output of the impact of the war in Ukraine that has had an outsized impact on developing countries, including Pakistan, in the form of energy insecurity, food insecurity, and skyrocketing inflation. To top it all off, we faced last year the catastrophic climate catastrophe in the form of the floods, took 10% out of our GDP, washed away 5 million acres of standing crop. People are still to 2 million houses. People to this day are facing the consequences of this natural calamity, and we will have to deal with the economic and other consequences of this for times to come. We also have seen, as I've mentioned, over the past year, a steady uptick in terrorist activity, but more recently, significant terrorist attacks in Peshawar and in Karachi. Of course, that too has an economic impact. And finally, the cherry on the cake is our negotiations with the IMF are as ever ongoing and still not concluded. And that uncertainty also has economic consequences. So Pakistan is facing a perfect storm of crises. The economic situation is nothing short of a disaster, particularly for the bottom of the pyramid. The weakest, the poorest in Pakistani society, those affected by the flooding, are facing the burden of this more than anybody else, which is why we insist and we request from international financial institutions to cooperate with Pakistan appropriately so that we could provide the necessary relief to our people. Thank you. I don't want to...
If you have final remarks for the Urdu audience, just a quick...
Sorry, मैं आप सबका बहुत शुक्रगुजार हूँ.
Just a final
आज पाकिस्तान ने अपने capacity में, as chair of the Council of Foreign Ministers of the OIC, हमने 2 तारीखी events host किए हैं यहाँ अक़वाम मुत्तहिदा में. 2 दिन पहले इंटरनेशनल वुमेन्स डे पे हमने औरतों और इस्लाम के नाम पे OIC के प्लेटफॉर्म पे यहाँ यूनाइटेड नेशंस में एक इवेंट रखा था जिसमें पूरा दुनिया ने अपना नुमाइंदगी और पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू सामने लेकर आया। और इस इवेंट का मकसद ये था कि दुनिया में जो इस्लाम के बारे में गलत फहमी है, जो औरतों के हकूक़ के बारे में और इस्लाम के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में औरतों के हकूक़ के बारे में जो गलत फहमी है, उसको दूर करने की एक कोशिश था। अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह बहुत कामयाब किया। हमने दुनिया को एक मुंह तोड़ जवाब दिया कि इस्लाम वो मज़हब है जो औरतों को सबसे पहले हकूक़ दिए हैं। इस्लाम वो मज़हब है जिन्होंने पहले मुस्लिम दुनिया को खातून वज़ीर आज़म दिया। पाकिस्तान में, तुर्किया में, बांग्लादेश में, जगह जगह, और जहाँ हमारे मसाइल हैं वहाँ हमारा कामयाबियाँ है। और हम समझते हैं कि इस्लाम के नतीजे में औरतों के ये हकूक़ मिले हैं। साथ साथ OIC के प्लेटफॉर्म से जहाँ ये एक बड़ा कामयाबी तो था कि पिछले साल हमने 15 मार्च के लिए जो रेजोल्यूशन पास करवाया, लेकिन अगर सिर्फ हमने रेजोल्यूशन पास करवाना था और भूल जाना था तो वो उसका इम्पैक्ट नहीं होता। आज जो हुआ कि जनरल असेंबली का, यूनाइटेड नेशंस का, अक़वाम मुत्तहिदा के जनरल असेंबली का हॉल में आपका वज़ीर ख़ारजा बतौर OIC का काउंसिल ऑफ फॉरेन मिनिस्टर्स ने को कन्वीन किया, प्रेसिडेंट ऑफ द जनरल असेंबली एक तरफ और यूनाइटेड नेशन सेक्रेटरी जनरल दूसरी तरफ, और पूरी दुनिया को सामने बिठा दिया और उनके साथ इस्लामोफोबिया का दिन मनाया और पूरी दुनिया से कहलवा दिया कि इस्लामोफोबिया गलत है। मुसलमानों के खिलाफ जो ज़्यादतियाँ हो रहे हैं उनसे उसका मज़ामत करवाया कि अगर हमारा कुरान पाक पे, अगर हमारा इबादत गाहों पे हमले होंगे तो उसका भी मज़ामत करवाया। और मैं समझता हूँ आज हमने एक तारीखी रवायत शुरू किया इस प्रेसिडेंट के बाद। इंशाअल्लाह ताला आगे जाके पाकिस्तान के पास तो OIC का ये प्लेटफॉर्म नहीं होगा, लेकिन आगे जाके इंशाअल्लाह ताला हर साल यहाँ इसी अक़वाम मुत्तहिदा में OIC और यूनाइटेड नेशंस इस्लामोफोबिया दिन मनाएंगे और आहिस्ता आहिस्ता जो जुल्म और नाइंसाफ़ी मुस्लिम दुनिया में और गैर मुस्लिम दुनिया में जहाँ मुसलमान रहते हैं उनके साथ हो रहे हैं, उनका हम मुकाबला करेंगे। आई एम वेरी ग्रेटफुल, आई एम सॉरी, आई हैव टू रन टू द SG।
व्हाट्सएप के सरबराह विल कैथकार्ट ने खदशा जाहिर कर दिया है कि बरतानिया में नए ऑनलाइन सेफ्टी बिल की मंजूरी के बाद व्हाट्सएप पर पाबंदी लगाई जा सकती है। कैथकार्ट ने कहा है कि अगर बरतानिया में नए ऑनलाइन सेफ्टी बिल के तहत व्हाट्सएप की एंड-टू-एंड इंस्क्रिप्शन ख़त्म करने या इसमें तब्दीली करने का मुतालबा किया गया तो हम ऐसी हिदायत पर अमल करने से इनकार कर देंगे। बरतानिया में व्हाट्सएप पर पाबंदी कबूल कर लेंगे, ताहम सिक्योरिटी प्रोटोकॉल्स पर किसी किस्म का समझौता नहीं करेंगे। बरतानवी मीडिया से बात करते हुए उन्होंने कहा कि अगर हमें महसूस हुआ कि हमें सार्फिन की सिक्योरिटी कमज़ोर करने के लिए मजबूर किया जा रहा है तो हम बरतानिया से चले जाएंगे, क्योंकि हम समझते हैं कि डाटा के तहफ़्फ़ुज़ के बारे में सार्फिन का एतमाद बहाल रखने के लिए एंड-टू-एंड इंस्क्रिप्शन इंतहाई ज़रूरी है। उन्होंने कहा कि अगर हम बरतानवी हुकूमत के लिए अपनी सिक्योरिटी कमज़ोर कर देंगे तो इसका मतलब होगा कि हमें दीगर हुकूमतों के लिए भी यही करना पड़ेगा। बरतानवी अरकान कानून साज असम्बली के साथ गुफ्तगू करते हुए उन्होंने कहा कि एंड-टू-एंड इंस्क्रिप्शन पैगामात को इधर उधर घुमाने के बजाय ये यकीनी बनाता है कि जिस शख्स ने पैगाम भेजा और जिसने वसूल किया सिर्फ वही 2 लोग इसे पढ़ रहे हैं। व्हाट्सएप खुद भी मैसेज नहीं पढ़ सकता, इसलिए हम कानून नाफिज करने वालों की किसी भी किस्म का मवाद रोकने में मदद नहीं कर सकते। ताहम बरतानवी हुकूमत का जोर है कि प्राइवेसी और सेफ्टी साथ साथ नहीं चल सकते।
अपनी लगाई हुई हर ईंट से जिंदगी की उम्मीद जगाएं, मिलकर शौकत खानम अस्पताल कराची बनाए।
लाहौर और पेशावर में कामयाब प्रोजेक्ट्स के बाद
आइए पाकिस्तान के तीसरे और सबसे बड़े शौकत खानम मेमोरियल हॉस्पिटल कराची की तामीर के लिए अपना अपना हिस्सा डालें। फंड रेजिंग गाला डिनर 17 मार्च शाम 7 बजे टेरेस ऑन द पार्क पर मुनक्किद होगा। अली अजमत आवाज का जादू जगाएंगे।
डिनर विल बी सर्व्ड।
परचेज योर टिकट ऑनलाइन। मजीद मालूमात के लिए राब्ता कीजिए। अपने हिस्से की नेकी कमाओ, मिलकर शौकत खानम कराची बनाओ।